Welcome to the Beginner Photography Podcast, where today we are learning the ins and outs of editing on the go. Let's get into it.
Welcome to the Beginner Photography Podcast with Raymond Hatfield, the podcast dedicated to helping you grow your photography skills. Raymond interviews the world's top photographers in their field to ask questions that will get you taking better photos today. Now, with you as always, husband, father, home brewer, LA Dodger fan, and Indianapolis wedding photographer, Raymond Hatfield.
Welcome back to this episode of the Beginner Photography Podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today. I am Raymond Hatfield, and today we have a much requested interview about editing that I cannot wait to dive into. But first, I want to give a shout out to Leah for leaving the podcast a 5-star iTunes review. She said, I get valuable information out of each and every episode. I enjoy the interviews, and this is the only podcast I am a patron of, and it is well worth it. Leah, you are way too kind. Thank you so much for your review. As Leah mentioned, she is a patron of the podcast, which means that each week she gets an extra extended interview where that week's guest shares information specifically related to the business and making money with your camera. If you want to start making money with your camera, do like Leah and consider becoming a patron by heading over to beginnerphotographypodcast.com and clicking the premium membership button at the top. In today's interview, premium members will hear how to improve your workflow to save time and get your clients their photos faster, how mobile editing can give you an advantage over your competition, how to manage client expectations, and honestly, what Erin shares here is massive and caused me to re-examine how I conduct my business. And lastly, how to handle progress over progression to get things done fast. So if you want to know the answers to these questions, become a patron by heading over to beginnerphotographypodcast.com and clicking the premium membership button now. So let's get into this week's interview with Aaron Nace. And if the name isn't familiar, he is the founder of Phlearn, the Photoshop and Lightroom education website and super popular YouTube channel that has helped me on more than one occasion. And be sure to stick around to the end after the interview, where Aaron gives me something special to share just with you, the listeners of the Beginner Photography Podcast. So without any further ado, let's get into this week's interview with Aaron Nace. Today's guest is Aaron Nace, the host of Phlearn, the educational website and amazing YouTube channel focused on photography and post-production. Today, we're going to be talking all about editing and all of the options that we have available now for mobile. So, Aaron, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, so great to be here. Excited to talk about all the fun things we can do with editing our images.
That's one of those things that it's crazy. The amount of just the scope of the world that editing is, how many different nuances there is that comes within editing is sometimes it causes me to have a headache. So I'm excited to be talking to an expert and really getting into editing and what it can do for our photos. But before we do that, can you share how you got into photography / when you started focusing on post-production?
Yeah, for sure. So my background in Photoshop actually came first. I am traditionally trained as a designer. I went to school for product design and got out of school and was doing a lot of like 3-dimensional product work, designing things like cars and tools and things like that. And so we had a lot of work to do with actually like visual rendering and creating composition. And this was more like using Photoshop as a piece of paper, using layers to like, basically if you want to like design a car, you have to draw it first, right? And then you have to like see how it looks in different dimensions and things like that. So I would do all that in Photoshop using a tablet or like a pressure sensitive screen. So that's where my background in Photoshop started, and photography actually came to me a little bit later down the line. I was taking a trip after graduating from university and just fell in love with photography through the fact that I had a camera with me. I was going to a lot of really interesting places, and I was like, this is a once lifetime opportunity. I got to capture everything that I can, and kind of fell in love with photography during that process. So when I got back, I realized, hey, I can take my love of Photoshop that I've been working on for years and combine that with my new love of photography and really create some things that are just like kind of out of this world. So my background in the photography side of things is mostly conceptual and fine art photography. So doing things like making people levitate in the air, or making a person as big as a house, and doing this and trying to make it look 100% real, not look like it was Photoshop, just make it look like a photograph. And that's kind of what drove my passion to create through both photography and Photoshop.
So when you first kind of made that connection in your head, like, hey, I got these photos, I can turn these into something, fantastic. What was the goal for kind of where you are today? How did that progress into this kind of education powerhouse that it is?
So it was all just for fun in the beginning. I was just doing like I'd had these crazy ideas in my head, and I just wanted to see if I could pull it off. Can I do this? It was just a hobby. I had a full-time job at the time, and it was just a way for me to get my creativity out there and kind of give myself a little bit of a challenge. And I was posting my work online, and the comments just started pouring in like, this is cool. How did you do this? How did you do this? And I realized there was a big gap in the marketplace. There weren't a lot of people teaching how to do these techniques. And so I started teaching people individually, just one-on-one through like Skype sessions. And
Oh man.
yeah, it was just like a, very natural progression. And I had such a good time, and, the response was really great. So it was pretty much immediately obvious that there was a need there. And I started releasing videos for free on YouTube. This was back in, oh boy, this is almost 10 years ago now. And, almost from the beginning, we had a really, really great response. So that was, to me, just, again, not necessarily like a business. It was more just something I was doing fun, a way to give back to the community. And it kind of turned into a natural business when I realized, not only people were interested in short snippets on YouTube, but they wanted longer, more in depth, like more difficult topics. They really wanted to master this stuff. And that's when I founded Flearn.com. And we fast forward today, we actually have a subscription service where you can pay, it's kind of like Netflix, you just pay a monthly fee and then you get access to everything. So that's basically the whole thing in a nutshell.
Yeah, that's insane. What a great journey. That's crazy that it took 10 years. When you think of kind of like online and you just have this idea that things happen fast, fast, fast. But it's great to hear that you stuck with this for so long, and here you are today. I kind of want to know a little bit more about you and kind of what, aside from obviously founding Flearn, would you call yourself like a post-production artist? Is there a different title that you would have for the job that you're teaching, I suppose?
Yeah, for sure. So I would say, as far as my art is concerned, I would consider myself more of a photographer than a post-production artist.
Mhm.
I use post-production as a tool. So
Mhm.
the way I kind of see Photoshop and any type of editing tool is just it's another skill set. It's another tool that you can use to create the images that you want to create. So,
Mhm.
we're getting out there. A camera is just a tool to interpret how you see the world. If you decide maybe you're going to photograph people in a studio setting, you can bring in lighting and you can do backgrounds and you can use props. And those are all just tools as well. And then when you get to the computer, you have different programs that serve as different tools as well. So it kind of all starts with an initial vision of what do I want this end product to look like, and then gathering the tools that are necessary to create that end product. So for my personal work, I do all of my own photography. It's all purpose driven. And then Photoshop is a tool that I use to bring those concepts that I photograph together. So both as a
Gotcha.
photographer and as, I guess, a digital artist. But my primary passion is teaching. That's what I'm all about. It's like, how can I get this information to as many people as possible?
Yeah, no, for sure, for sure. Um, so when it comes to the editing side of things, you mentioned Photoshop there. There's a lot of photographers, especially in the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook group, who maybe aren't at that level yet where they understand the difference truly between Lightroom and Photoshop. So before we actually go any further, can you just settle once and for all, what is the difference between Photoshop and Lightroom, and which is the right choice for who?
Yeah. So Lightroom is kind of like step one, and Photoshop is step two. So if you're at zero right now, if you're not doing anything, start with Lightroom. Start with step one. Uh, the things that you can do in Lightroom are make your image brighter or darker. Let's say you've overexposed your image, or you've underexposed your image, or maybe not even your whole image. Maybe your subject looks good, but the sky is too bright. That's the sort of thing that you can fix in Lightroom. Maybe you have a lot of distortion from your lens, or the colors aren't exactly like what you wanted. Maybe your white balance is off. In other words, your photo came out a little too blue or a little too yellow. That's the sort of thing that you can fix in Lightroom. And it's an incredibly powerful program. It can do quite a bit of work just improving a photo as a whole. Now, step two is Photoshop. And this is where we get into a little bit more advanced techniques. Things like retouching, taking a portrait and removing blemishes, doing advanced techniques to make the skin look a little bit smoother, a little bit cleaner. Also things like compositing. If I want to take an image of a person in this location and put them in a different location, I can use Photoshop to do that sort of thing. So I would say, I use the same step one, step two with my own work as well. When I take photographs, I first bring them into Lightroom and get them to look as good as I possibly can in Lightroom. And then from Lightroom, I go into Photoshop and take the next steps. So it's a step one, step two process.
Gotcha. So it's not like if you're a beginner, start with Lightroom. If you're a professional, you only use Photoshop. You use both in tandem, but that's the order in which you go through editing your photos. Step one and step two. Gotcha.
Yeah, most definitely. And you want to start with Lightroom no matter where you are in the process. If you've never used any photo editing software, you want to start with Lightroom. Or if you're a professional, you still want to start with Lightroom. So it's the great first step after getting your images onto your computer.
Yeah, I've been asked before. As you can imagine, there's a lot of confusion between the two for new photographers. Kind of what do I use? And obviously the answer is both. But I think as a wedding photographer, I'd say that I use Lightroom probably 98% of my work, and then the remaining 2%, like you said, the retouching is done there in Photoshop. So I can totally see how there's the use there for both of them. But when it comes to Photoshop, I really want to kind of get into this, right? Because the Photoshop is more of the manipulation, within photos on your phone. On your iPhone, you can change the exposure, you can change the contrast, and these things are simple and they're built in, but you can't add a sun, or you can't add anything or truly manipulate an image without kind of taking the next step, I guess. We'll just continue with that analogy by going into extra apps or whatever. So before we really talk about the manipulation side of it, can you kind of share with me what are some tools for mobile that are specifically, I totally phrased this question wrong. This is a bad question. What would you suggest are some tools that beginners can use on their phone to get started with manipulating their photos past just simple exposure adjustments?
Right. So actually, Lightroom for mobile is a really fantastic program. So recently, Adobe came out with a new software suite. It's a replacement for Lightroom Classic, which technically they haven't phased out Lightroom Classic. That's still available. But there's a new program called Lightroom. It's for your computer, but you can also use it on your phone and on a tablet. And the editing capabilities in that program are really fantastic. So you can really go beyond just making your photo lighter or darker. For instance, there's selective editing in that program where you can, grab a gradient and drag, just affect your sky. So you could have your sky be a little bit more blue, a little bit more vibrant. You can select individual colors and make those, maybe you want the greens to be a little bit more saturated, or you've took a photo and, like the background might be a little bit distracting. You can kind of lower the contrast of the background to make your subject stand out. So you can do all those things in Lightroom for mobile. And the best part about that is that program's free. So it's very easily accessible. You don't have to load in, professional raw images. you can load images that you've taken right from your camera and edit those right on your mobile device. But if you do load images in from your camera, you can work on your raw images on your mobile device as well, which I think is just insanely powerful. And the editing capabilities within that program are really very, very good. So I think anyone who has used Lightroom Classic in the past is going to have no problem with the transition to Lightroom Mobile. So that's really like my main my main program when I'm editing on my phone. Now Photoshop is in the process. They're releasing Photoshop for the iPad relatively soon. I know they announced it with the iPad. There's a beta version out, which I've had the opportunity to test, and it's going to be a fantastic program for taking that next step on mobile devices. And then, we'll see the iPad version come out in a couple of months, and then further down the road, there's a good chance we're going to see a mobile version for that iPad as well. We're kind of waiting on hardware to catch up with the software, but I've had the opportunity to use some of the newer tablets like the iPad Pro, and I got to say the hardware on that thing is just it's mind-boggling. It's a tablet that's as powerful as a modern computer. So as we see mobile devices take more of the marketplace and become better computers, we're going to see software that improves to be able to match the computing capabilities of those devices as well.
Yeah. It's I remember when the day that the iPad was announced, like the original iPad, I looked at my my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, and I was like, one day I'm not even going to need a computer. Like, I cannot wait to just like be able to edit an entire wedding on the iPad, like on the way home from the in my self-driving Tesla. I don't even have to drive. I can just edit by the time I get home. The wedding's done and I can deliver it. It's going to be fantastic.
Yeah.
And I think that now, even though it's almost 10 years later, we're starting to get to that point, and it's really exciting. But with that said, even though that we're almost 10 years in, mobile editing is still very new.
It is.
And it's kind of a bit of a wild west, where desktop editing is it's pretty polished. We've been doing this for a long time.
Yes.
So why would anybody even want to edit on mobile today?
Well, I got to say, that dream scenario you had where you can edit your entire wedding on your iPad, I believe 100% that that's here now. We're already in that stage. And if you have the right technology in your hands. So I picked up, the new iPad Pro 12.9 inch because I'm going to be doing some workshops using this as a mobile editing device. Mm-hmm. And I was a little skeptical. Like, is this all it's cracked up to be? Like, is the software there? Is the hardware there? And I got to say, it's there. Like, we are in that time. They're doing a really nice job with the software releases that are coming out soon. Soon you're going to be able to plug in your SD card directly into your iPad via a little, dongle
accessory,
whatever they call them. So that day is very much here. Editing on your mobile device, honestly, because Lightroom, for instance, is cloud-based software, and what that means is any edit that you make on one device, uploads to the internet. So when you look at it on another device, the change is already there. It syncs across all your devices automatically, and for that reason, and why I believe it's an actual viable tool now is you don't have to do any of your work twice. You do your work on some of it on your computer, pick up your iPad, and the work you did on your computer is automatically applied on your iPad. You put down your iPad, pick up your phone, and the work you did there is automatically applied on your phone. So you're never doing multiple edits of the same image. All of it is synced at the same time. Mm-hmm. So it's really just whatever device you have. And for me, I carry an iPad with me just about wherever I go. So if I have an extra 20 or 30 minutes where I'm just kind of like hanging out at a coffee shop, like, why not do some editing there? Like, the tools are there. And if you have the device with you, it's hard to predict when you're going to have extra time. And, I find myself having extra time just in the randomest of cases. And sometimes I'm just like sitting in my car for 20 minutes, like waiting for a friend to go grab a coffee and come back to the car or whatever. And if I can grab my iPad there and edit photos, like, in a professional capacity and not have to redo that. And that's 20 minutes that I would otherwise just be like sitting on my phone browsing Instagram or just like twiddling my thumbs. And that's an extra 20 minutes that I've saved of working at home. So I think these mobile devices, it's not like, hey, now I'm only going to edit on this mobile device. But the deal is most people have a mobile device with them at all times, right? Like I've got my phone with me at all time. I have an iPad with me a lot of the time. And if I can get this editing done when I'm, in random situations, and I'm just like, I'm in bed right now, I'm not quite tired. I want to stay up for another 20 minutes. I'll flick through my images and I'll make some edits there. Perfect. And then tomorrow when you open up your laptop, those edits are automatically there. That's where I think mobile editing really has its place nowadays.
So I kind of guess where I get caught up is sort of the now we don't have to go too in depth in this, but it's more of like the file management side of things, because if I'm on my way home from a wedding and I'm loading 150 gigs worth of raw photos onto my iPad to then the next day when I wake up to start editing, it has to upload all those photos from the iPad to the Adobe Cloud and then back onto my computer, and then I got to figure out what to do with those. So I could see how, in a sense of like, I have an idea for a conceptual photo or fine art photo, and this is only going to take 5 RAWs rather than 5,000, where this makes sense today. So if we're in that situation where we have this idea, because oftentimes photographers kind of get overwhelmed by editing tools like Photoshop because they just don't know what they want to do.
Yes.
Right? Like me in particular, I go out and I shoot photos of my kids all the time. So I bring those photos into Photoshop and I have no idea what to do with these photos. And yet then I see a photo of, like a New York skyline, and then somehow a waterfall is added to it to be coming through the buildings, So to be able to create a photo like this, do you need to know what you need when you go out shooting before you edit it? Or can you just bring in any old photo and create something out of your imagination?
I think you have a much better chance of creating a good final product if you have a clear idea from the beginning. So for me, when I have an idea about an image that I want to pull off, I spend a great deal of time in the early stages, pre-production, thinking about this idea. What's the story that I want to tell? Like, how am I going to tell this story? And if I'm going to need to capture multiple images and combine them together later on, how am I going to capture these images in a way that they're going to wind up looking realistic? So that planning and the preparation stage, it's not always the most exciting, but it really does help you end up with a better final product. And you touched on something that's really important. Not knowing what you want to do in Photoshop. I think we've all gone through that, but kind of like the way I use an analogy, like in the kitchen, right? Like, if you go in the kitchen and you're like, I'm going to make food, and then you just like, but what food am I going to make? Like you're not going to get anywhere. You know what I mean? But if you're like, you know what, tonight I'm going to make chicken tikka masala, and then you look up a recipe for chicken tikka masala and you go to the store and you get all your ingredients and you come back and you follow the recipe. At the end of the night, you're going to have chicken tikka masala. It might not be the best you've ever had in your life, but you're going to wind up with something. And that's a very different situation than just like staring into your refrigerator and, hoping something appears. Yeah. So
opening it every 5 minutes, like, is there something new?
Right. Is there something new in there now? Like, what's the deal? Come on. And I've been in, I'm an avid cook. I love cooking. And I've, had those moments so many times where it's just like, there's nothing here in the kitchen for me. There's no meal. But the deal was I didn't have a vision of something I wanted to make, and I didn't get the ingredients of this thing. So starting out with an end product in your mind will help you get there. If you don't have an end product in mind, well, you're really not going to get anywhere at all.
Yeah, that's a great point. That is a great point, and that's a really good analogy too. I didn't think about that. So then at some point we have to, in that scenario, we have to know what chicken uh, tikka masala is, right? We have to know what that is.
Or it could be cereal and milk, right? But like either way, you're going to need your cereal and you're going to need your milk.
Right. But if you want to go out and you want to try something new, something that you've never made before, you don't know what the kitchen is possible of. You know what? This is getting way too confusing to bring in this kitchen situation.
No worries. But like the whole thing is, when you're looking for something you want to create, just like we have with food, right? Like there are restaurants out there that serve delicious food where you could go try something and be like, you know what? I like this food. I didn't realize I like this food, but I kind of like that. I want to see if I can make it on my own. We've got the same thing with Instagram, browsing images and saying like, you know what? I really like this photograph. I want to see if I can make something similar. I don't want to copy it, but what do I like about this photograph? Maybe I really like the lighting, or maybe I like the way that, this person was captured. I really feel like I can get to know them. Maybe I want to try to recreate that with my next photo. So having all these tools and inspiration allows us to kind of build a little bit of a reference point to where we can say, okay, cool. That's what I want to do. Now let's go ahead and try to get that done.
I don't know if in a past life you learned how to read minds, but you just did it to me perfectly, and you got the answer that I was looking for out of a terrible, terrible question. So
no, I could see where you were going, so I was like, yeah. I think we can pull it together.
It was perfect. That was exactly it. So I kind of want to know a little bit about. This is kind of the next step, right? You first get started. You start wandering into editing. Maybe you're charging for your work. Photographers who are just starting to charge for their work, what is something that they can do, perhaps with mobile, to improve their workflow? Hey, Raymond here, and if you're listening to this, you are listening to the free version of today's interview. If you want to hear more from today's guest about the business of photography, consider becoming a premium member. Every week, guests answer questions about products, pricing, packages, and so much more that will help your growing photography business thrive. This is the next logical step. To join, head over to beginnerphotographypodcast.com and click the premium membership button at the top of the page. Jeez, I love it. I just had so many ideas there running through my head about how even myself could kind of improve how I communicate with clients there. So I got some work after this.
Well, it's like you go to a restaurant, right? And you order something, like you have a certain expectation of what you're going to get when you order something. If you order a hamburger and you get a chicken sandwich, you're going to be like,
yeah.
I ordered a hamburger, and they'll be like, well, chicken is kind of like hamburgers, that's, we have an expectation. But if you go in and you're like, I ordered a hamburger, and your server is like, oh, you know what? We're actually out of hamburgers, but we do have chicken sandwich if you want that. Then you can decide, okay, chicken sandwich would be cool. That way, when you get the chicken sandwich, it's like, yep, this is what we agreed upon.
Expecting. Right.
Yeah, exactly. So it's all about managing those expectations.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of managing expectations, this is a very terrible segue, by the way. Thinking about like the idea to be able to edit everything on my iPad continues to get me excited, specifically for wedding photography. I know that it's, like we talked about, it's easier for conceptual photography or smaller batches of images. But this idea continues to get me excited. And for some reason, I keep buying the newest iPad because I keep thinking that there's something in that iPad that is going to let me, get to that next step. But I keep finding downsides, whatever it is. So I want to know from your point of view, what are some of the downsides to editing on a mobile device here in 2019?
Well, one of the deals with Lightroom for mobile, for instance, it is a cloud-based, software. So all of your images are being uploaded to the internet. So if you're on a really slow connection, that's just going to take a little bit of time. And like you said, sometimes you're coming back from a shoot with 150 gigabytes. Well, that's a lot of information to upload to the internet. And if you're not working on a fast connection, it's going to take a long time. And that might be a little bit frustrating for you. Not to mention that cloud storage isn't free. You know, anytime you upload something onto the internet, someone's paying for it, right? Like,
It's me. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, it depends, right? When you upload your images to Instagram, you're not paying for it. But guess what? The company that owns Instagram, Facebook, they're paying for that storage, right? That image is on a server somewhere and they're paying for that. So it's a funny little quote, like, if you're not paying for a service, then like you are the service or you are the product. And like when it comes to Instagram, the reason you don't have to pay to upload your images to Instagram is because they're serving you ads. They're making money off of you being on there. But let's say you have another like cloud storage platform where you want to back up your images, chances are you're going to have to pay for that. So the same is true with, you know, Lightroom for mobile, Lightroom for desktop. You get a certain amount of information that's included with your monthly plan, but if you want to start uploading 150 gigabytes, you know, per session, you're going to wind up paying a larger and larger monthly rate to store that much image, to store that many images on the cloud. So I would say if you're in that position, it may not make sense to upload every single photo to the cloud directly. It might make a little bit more sense to get your images on your computer first. Go ahead and call out the images that you're like not going to use, because out of 150 gigs, there's a good chance that some of those are just throwaways, right? Like,
no, not me. All of them are perfect.
Right. Yeah. And of course, like, you know, we want to take as many images as we can, but, you know, just an image that's like grossly underexposed or like, oops, I forgot, I took a picture of the ground on accident, you know, get rid of those first before you put those on the cloud. So that's a potential thing that we want to look at too, especially if we're working with a lot of files. You know, and then really just bandwidth. You know, when you're working on your images on your computer and they're on a local hard drive, fantastic, you know, that connection between your hard drive and your computer is likely very fast. But if you are in a slower, you know, a slower network situation, it might be a little bit of a slower bandwidth. You know, I got to say, though, to that, what could be seen as a con, on the exact opposite side of that, all of your images are now backed up permanently on the cloud. So let's say your computer did have a failure or someone stole your computer or your hard drive crashed or whatever. Well, all of your images, by using one of these cloud-based servers, are already on the cloud. So it's not only is it a way to edit wherever you are, but it's also an instant backup solution. So it has a very positive side of it as well. It kind of takes all of your image backup and does pretty much automatically.
Yeah. So one of the things that I run into when it comes to editing is when I edit on a computer, the monitor is calibrated. I have the light in here dialed in right where I need it, so that every time I edit, it's a very consistent experience, so that I'm editing the exact same way every single time. With mobile, I could be on my couch where the lighting is entirely different. Maybe there's a window right in front of me, and that's kind of skewing how I see the image itself, which can affect how the image gets edited. Now, I know that Apple at least has put in things like, is it True Tone or whatever, that calibrates the monitor itself. But aside from that, is there any way that we can kind of get around that, just so that we can ensure that we have a more consistent edit, so that when we post it online, it looks as though it looks the same way it did on our mobile device?
I would say, if you are concerned about color to that degree, I would do all of the majority of your editing on your mobile device, on your iPad, whatever, when you're out and about. I mean, do it on your computer. Well, just do it on whatever device you have with you. But then when it comes time to send those images off, get in your environment that is dialed in and just do a quick look through, and you'll be able to see, okay, are these up to my standards of where they should be? And if they aren't, you can do a little quick tweak before there. So it totally depends. Not everyone has an environment like you do where the lighting is perfectly dialed in and they've got a calibrated monitor. And that's totally okay too. But, if you're a person who does care about like having your colors exactly, render perfectly, and you have one of these environments, then I would just say make that the last step in your chain before you upload them to the internet.
Okay, good tip. Good tip. One thing I see a lot is whenever I scroll through Facebook is just really boring cell phone photos from my family and friends. It's just very boring. There's nothing to it. Straight out of camera. They took the shot, uploaded it directly to Facebook. What are some things that everybody listening could be or should be doing to their photos to prevent them from posting boring shots?
Well, I think part of that is depends on the the desire of the person taking those pictures too, right? Like,
well, sure, yeah, no, I mean, I give my aunt a free pass because she doesn't understand, but I'm assuming that for those listening, they obviously have some sort of interest in photography and they don't want their photos just to blend in with everybody else. What are some things that what are just some very simple beginner things that we should be doing to our photos to make them stand out just a little bit more?
Right. Well, I think even a lot of that can be done with the photography side of it as well. So, capturing things from new angles that might be just a little bit more interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe bring your phone a little bit lower to the ground or get it a little bit higher. These angle changes can make a huge, huge difference in the perception of a photo. When we look at photos of the past that have caught our interest, we're talking about photos that are 50 or 60 years old. And the technology that those images were, like a 50 or 60-year-old camera is a dinosaur in terms of technology compared to what you have on your smartphone.
Of course.
So the technology there is already really good. So, using the techniques that people have used for hundreds of years to create great images, those techniques will continue to make your images stand out. So, finding out what's interesting about an image and then framing your photograph to focus on that interesting part of it. One thing that draws me into photographs a lot of the time is I want to feel like I'm getting to know the person in that photograph a little bit more. I want a little bit of a sense of story, like what's going on here. I want to be pulled into this image, and I want to be asking more questions. Like I want, you know what I mean? It's like you take a bite of a hamburger and it's like, I want more of this, right? Like, ooh, there's something interesting here. I want even more of that. And that's what I want to see with photography. That to me is what makes a photograph interesting. So, photographs where everyone's looking at the camera and smiling, totally good. Those have their purposes. Those have, their uses. But those don't usually tell me a lot of a story. It doesn't pull me in, and it doesn't have me asking, what's next? What's more? What happened before this? What's going to happen after this? So definitely take those images where you're, everyone's smiling and looking at the camera, but then also take those images where maybe you're getting up close and personal and taking pictures of people in the moment. Maybe they don't even know you're taking those pictures. So a little bit more of a candid style of photography, and try to get those reactions. If a person is laughing or, like having like an organic emotion, that if you can capture that sort of thing, it's just going to be a little bit more interesting in general. And I think that we can go with our guts as far as like what's interesting to us to look at in person. Like, if I'm looking at a bunch of people smiling, looking at me, that's not that interesting, right? Yeah. Like it's just not, but if I'm looking at someone like working on an engaging task and maybe they're frustrated or maybe they're like crazy excited because they just like did something new for the first time, like that just visually is more interesting to look at just as a person. So just using your eyes first as your camera and like, is this interesting or not? And if it is, that's a good time to bring out a camera. And if it's not, well, maybe change something up. Maybe wait a few minutes till something is interesting. One thing that I like to do is if I am taking a picture of someone who's like, quote unquote, posing for the camera or a little bit like doesn't want to have their picture taken, I'll take a couple of those pictures and then I'll say, okay, done. And then I'll take a couple more when they think that we're done, but they like relax, they become themselves. And then like, maybe they'll like laugh in a genuine way because they're not posing for the camera anymore because I think that I'm done taking the pictures. And then those pictures a lot of the time are like the golden gems, where it's
Yeah.
like that's them for real after they think the posing is done.
That is a great tip. That is a great tip. I think everybody's always looking for how to get more genuine photos while in a pose, and if anybody follows that, that's I don't see how it couldn't work. It's funny. I interviewed, I believe it was. Oh, well, I interviewed Kevin Mullins, who's a documentary wedding photographer from the UK, a few weeks ago. I'm trying to remember. A few years ago, I watched a video that was all about documentary wedding photography. I can't remember if it was Kevin Mullins or if it was actually Zach Arias. But regardless, the tip was when he wants to take a photo of somebody, he'll go up to them um, to make sure that they're not, like camera aware or whatever, and then he will take their picture. They're gonna look at them. No, wait. I just screwed the whole thing up. But there was something to the effect of like looking down at, no, like looking up. Oh yeah, that was it. Okay, here we go. Let me start again. He walks up to them. He'll like take a picture. He'll make it look like he's taking a picture of the sky, so that the people don't care. They don't think that he's looking at them. And then he'll point the camera at them and make it appear as if he's looking at the photo that he just took. Now these people are, they're not aware of the photo being taken of them, completely relaxed in front of the camera. That's when he takes the shot. And it's just getting that kind of natural reaction, which is what you were just sharing there. And that was a very roundabout way of getting there. But once again, fantastic tip.
Yeah, that's super cool.
Yeah.
And, like, I get it. Like, I try not to feel like I'm taking advantage of anyone. So at the end, I'm going to show them the pictures and be like, hey, look at these awesome pictures we got of you.
Sure.
Like the goal is to like, I want people to feel really good about the pictures that I take of them.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, I think as long as that's your goal, you really can't do wrong. It's when we run into situations where, we feel like maybe we're taking advantage of the people we're photographing. That energy to me is something that I always try to avoid. So it's not a secrecy in the way of like, this is for me. It's a secrecy of like, this is actually for you. And it's a way where we're going to get really great pictures of you.
Yeah.
And if you don't like them, I'll delete them. Like, I have no interest personally in posting images of people that they don't like. Like, it's not for me. It's for them. So, if they're happy with their photographs, like, cool. My job is, I got a gold star, right?
yeah, I get that sticker for the day for sure.
Exactly.
Well, Aaron, I really want to be conscious of your time. We've been speaking for almost an hour now, so I only got 2 last questions for you. Are you ready?
Let's do it.
Okay. So while I hope that this conversation was helpful to many listening, it definitely was for me. So I have to thank you for that. There's just no replacing practice, and this is where obviously Flearn comes in. On Flearn, you have mini tutorials. I want to know, where do you think that listeners should start? Like, what is lesson number 1? What is something that everybody should know when it comes to editing or the post-production side of photography?
So, as I said earlier, Lightroom, in my opinion, is step 1, and Photoshop is step 2. So if you're interested in learning Lightroom, we've got fantastic tutorials. We've got a tutorial called The Beginner's Guide to Lightroom Classic, which is starting from, hey, I've never opened this program, all the way to by the end of the tutorial, you're like, oh, I know how to use Lightroom Classic now, and I feel like I can improve my photographs through what I've learned. Mm-hmm. That's a great place to start. If you're interested in Lightroom for desktop and mobile, we have a tutorial on Lightroom desktop and mobile. All these are available on Flearn.com, and it's a subscription service, kind of like Netflix. So you just pay monthly and you get access to everything. There's a really great discount if you pay annually too, and you just get access to everything. So you can kind of take your learning to the next step. When you're ready to start learning Photoshop, we've got a tutorial called The Beginner's Guide to Photoshop, which is the perfect place to start learning Photoshop. So we try to just make that process a little bit easier. So like, here's a great place to start. And then when you're comfortable with Lightroom or when you're comfortable with Photoshop, we've got some other tutorials that are going to really kind of stretch you and teach you all the wonderful things that you can do in these programs.
I love it. Perfect. That's definitely the place to check it out. I've been watching Flern videos for years, and I can tell you personally that they have helped me fix many a problems with my photos. So personal high five there, and I can attest to the quality of these videos. You guys spare no expense. So,
Thanks so much.
of course, I got one last question for you, and it is. I would think that the most frequently asked question that I get about editing is, how do I know when I'm done? Can you please shed some light on this question?
So I would say, again, being goal oriented when you start is a great way to know when you're done. If you have really no goals, it's hard to know where you're going. I think about it like when I get into my car, if I don't have any destination in mind, I'm just going to drive around for a while, right? And how do you know when you're done driving around,
Yeah.
right? But if you have a destination, it's pretty obvious when you get there. So I would say that that's a fantastic place to start. Another little test that I give is just the do I like this image test? And for that test, my recommendation is to take a little bit of a break from your editing. So go ahead and work on an edit and get it to the point where you feel pretty good about it, and take a break. Could be 5-10 minutes. A day is even better. Come back and look at it again. And if you still like the image, you're done.
Yeah.
If there's something about it that you don't like, then you got a new goal in mind and you can go to work and try to fix that. But if you like the image, you're done. And you know what? Some images, you like the image straight out of camera. So you're done.
Yeah, it doesn't require much extra than that. So just kind of follow up on that. Every photo doesn't necessarily need to be edited.
No, every photo does not need to be edited. I think most photos can benefit from a little bit of editing.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it's not always a huge edit. Maybe it's just like bringing your shadow levels a little bit brighter, increasing the vibrance a little bit, adding a little bit of texture and clarity. Like it's not every photo needs to be edited, greatly or to a huge degree, but there's a good chance that you could improve little aspects of your photographs, and those areas still warrant a little editing. I took photos of my partner and I recently at the Garfield Park Conservatory here in Chicago.
Yes.
And, we were photographing out of the window and I wanted that to be exposed properly, but she and I were dark. We were a little bit too dark. So I brought that into Lightroom Mobile on my phone. I used the brush selection tool. So I brushed over our faces and brought up the exposure a little bit. And then, boom, we were properly exposed and the background was properly exposed as well. So not a huge edit, but something that definitely helped the photograph.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, Aaron, again, I have to thank you for coming on, sharing everything that you did. Like I said, you opened up my eyes to a lot of things that I didn't know about editing, and I know that the listeners are just going to be blown away, and they probably need a notepad right now. They've probably already filled it up. So, again, thank you so much for coming on. Before I let you go, can you please share with the listeners where they can learn more about you and Flern as well?
Yeah, for sure. So, phlearn.com is just a fantastic place to start, and we have hundreds and hundreds of free tutorials available. So if you're interested in the idea of editing, but you're not ready to start spending money, check out some of those free tutorials and you'll get a good sense of what you can do. And then when you're ready, you can go ahead and subscribe and get access to all of our pro content as well. We're on Flern on Instagram and Facebook and all of the major social media platforms as well. So if you want to connect to us, we'd love to hear from you.
Perfect. Wonderful. Aaron, again, thank you so much for coming on, and I hope to chat to you soon.
Yeah, so good. Thanks, Raymond.
This interview was a tough one. I'm not going to lie. When I was coming up with questions, it was difficult to figure out things to talk about that were more technical, things that could be explained, over audio. Because editing is technical. It's more technical than it is philosophical, like photography. I tried my best, and I really hope that you enjoyed this interview. But like I said, Aaron had a little bonus for you listeners of the podcast. As Aaron mentioned, on his website, Flern, he offers Lightroom and Photoshop training. He wanted me to give you the code BEGINNER20, that is BEGINNER20, one word, no spaces or anything, to take 20% off of a yearly subscription to Flearn. So now you can learn anything and everything you would ever want to know about Photoshop and Lightroom for 20% off. So a huge thank you to Aaron and the whole Flearn team, specifically Lupe, for that one. Okay, so that is it for this week's episode. Until next week, I want you to get out. I want you to keep shooting. I want you to focus on yourself, and I want you to be safe. All right, I love you all.
If you enjoyed today's podcast, please leave us a review in iTunes or your favorite podcast player. And continue the conversation with Raymond and other listeners of the podcast by joining the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook group today. Thank you. We'll see you again next week.